Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Stutz, the director of the Royal Gorge Regional Museum History Center. This morning, our esteemed volunteer, Terri Meeks, will be talking about citizenship and naturalization. Before I turn it over to Terri, I just want to go over a few general housekeeping notes and some announcements. If you have any questions or comments you would like to share during the program, please type them in the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat box throughout the program, and we will make sure all of your questions get addressed at the end of the presentation. If you would like to test that feature now, please type hello so we know that you can hear us. As for upcoming events for the museum, we want to invite all of you to join us next Saturday, May 20th, for a full day Paleo to the People Fossil Symposium at the Steeple Events Center. Registration for the symposium is $10 per person, and you can register for it in advance at the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center or the day of the symposium at the Steeple Events Center, starting at 9 a.m. that day. The symposium will feature local and regional speakers with presentations on the unique significance of this region to the science of paleontology. There will be refreshments served throughout the day and an hour-and-a-half break during the lunch hour. The registration for the symposium will go towards the Friends of the Museum and will include 1-year membership to that organization. You can also catch us this week on KRLN Morning Line on Thursday at 8:30 a.m. and we will be talking about the Blossom Festival. And for our next virtual genealogy program with Terri, it will be on June 10th at 9 a.m. She will be discussing pension records. We will be posting the online registration for this program in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned. And again, thank you for joining us this morning, and I will now turn it over to Terri.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. Yes, many of our ancestors were immigrants at one point or another. And if your people came in the late 18th century through the 20th century, there may be some records for you to find in their citizenship applications. So as usual, we're going to start with a little bit of history. March 26, 1790 marked the first Naturalization Act. And in that act, it allowed for any free, white, adult alien, male or female, to apply for citizenship. This is going to be, that one line is going to be critical because there are going to be some exceptions to who was excluded. You had to reside in the United States for at least 2 years before becoming eligible to apply for citizenship. And you had to apply in a court. Now, the court may have been anywhere. Usually it was where the person resided, and they had to have been there for at least a year. And we'll talk about the different courts in a minute. You had to prove that you were of good moral character, usually by means of witness statements. And you had to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. If your ancestors arrived before 1776, they were British citizens, so that they did not have to apply for citizenship. However, if they arrived before 1776 and they were of another nationality, German, French, Yugoslavian, etc., they would have to apply for citizenship. Unfortunately, a lot of those extremely early records have been lost. Children under 21 in the initial act were automatically declared citizens. And this is where that note of all free white people come into play. Native Americans, wives. Now, it did say previously that males and females, but it was only single females. The wives of the immigrants were not necessarily automatically admitted to citizenship initially. Slaves, indentured servants, and later we have Asians coming into the country, and they were not eligible. And we'll look at some of the further naturalization acts as well. Within 5 years, they had increased the residency requirement from that 2 years to 5 years. And we are starting to see that certain documentation is recorded and maintained. Applicants had to declare their intention to become citizens, and they had to renounce their allegiance to any foreign sovereignty. And if they had a title when they came to the United States, they had to renounce that title. As the country developed, more documentation was required and different changes were made. In 1802, the clerk of court was required to record the entry of all aliens. So whether they were becoming citizens or not, they were recorded as aliens. There was a certificate of arrival. And in many cases, this certificate from 1802 forward was lost. But starting in 1906, we do see these certificates of arrival. They didn't do away with them, but in many cases, they were not saved. In 1848, citizenship was granted to all those inhabitants living in the territory that had previously been owned by Mexico and that were annexed to the United States following the Mexican War. And just for your information, this includes citizens from California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, as well as a little bit of Wyoming. So you can see that citizenship was automatically granted to perhaps a great number of people, and there will not be documentation for them. In 1855, citizenship was finally allowed for the aliens' wives. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, young men stepped forward and enlisted in support of either the Union side, in most cases, or for the citizenship, or the Confederacy. But by 1862, they thought the war was going to last a very short period of time. So by 1862, people were tired of the war and enlistments fell off. Well, with great forethought, Congress decided that they could enlist the foreign-born as a new source of troops. This is another primary reason for application for citizenship. If an alien had not applied for citizenship, he too was eligible for conscription into the Army or Navy in his home country, as well as in the United States. So citizenship applications increased. As a result of service in the Civil War, they shortened the 5-year probationary period for immigrants who had served. And the immigrant who had served honorably could apply for a citizenship and naturalization after only 1 year of residence. So an important fact in immigration. Here is a naturalization certificate and from 1862 for Christian Slater. And through the text, it says that he's of good moral character and he has sworn allegiance to the United States. He has served in the Civil War. And on the 17th of December in 1862, he is awarded his official citizenship. As the years went on, other people were either granted citizenship or excluded from citizenship. And I must also include that citizenship and naturalization changes continue even to this day. So by 1870, after the Civil Wars, we see that persons of African descent are allowed to apply. But in 1882, with the immigration of significant Asian populations, we see a Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred them from applying. By 1888, Native American women who had married white American men were allowed to become citizens. 1917, Puerto Rico residents were allowed to apply. And in 1919, Native American men who had served in World War I. But we have quota laws limiting the number of people from each of the countries to immigrate to the United States. And finally, by 1924, the Native Americans who had always lived here were finally allowed to full citizenship rights. There's one part of our history that is very, very interesting. If you were an American woman who married an immigrant, a foreign alien, you actually could lose your citizenship. If her husband became naturalized, she would regain her citizenship. But if he did not, she had to go through the immigration process or the naturalization process as if she were an immigrant. This is from 1907, and this finally was closed in about 1940. It partially ended in 1922 with the passage of the Cable Act. And when I say partially, there were certain provisions. By 1936, if the marriage ended in death or divorce, the woman could file an application to regain her citizenship. And for the most part, the only thing she had to do was put in statements and take an oath of allegiance in order to regain her citizenship. And we're going to look at one of these records. This one is for a Martha MP, and it shows that she was born in 1893 here in the United States in Washington, that she married a Canadian gentleman in 1916. So as of 1907, she lost her citizenship. It records her birth in 1893, and it also records her marriage, and they actually divorced in 1926. So she is just applying with her oath of allegiance in 1939 to regain her citizenship. This is another one from much later. This is for a Yetta Ostrovsky, and it does also give her information, her birth, a physical description of her marriage, and her marriage to a gentleman from Russia. So she lost her citizenship. It's interesting to note on this particular form that it is filed in 1951, and that there's no record that Sam has either been divorced or has died. So how's she getting her citizenship back? Because in 1940, finally, women who had lost their citizenship by marriage could repatriate regardless of their marital status. So here it's taking 38 years, and it's still not 100% closed, because these women had to show that they had continually resided in the United States since their marriage. If they had moved overseas to join their husband after their marriage and then come back to the United States, they had to reapply as if they were immigrants and go through the entire naturalization process. So coming up to more modern times, especially the early mid 19th century, as well as into the 20th and 21st centuries, we have three sets of naturalization papers. The first one, sometimes also called first papers, are the Declaration of Intention. The second is the Petition for Citizenship, and finally, a Certificate of Naturalization. We talked a little bit earlier, we saw that certificates of arrival were issued very early on, but somehow they have been lost. And many of these now, after 1906, are available and included in the naturalization packet. It is also important to recognize that not everyone did apply for citizenship. Some people came, lived in the country, and with thoughts that they might return to their home country. So they might not have applied. As mentioned, the first papers could be filed after 2 years of residence, and at least 3 years before he could be admitted to citizenship. So there was an additional waiting period once you filed your papers. The papers, if your person settled in the port city, might have been filed there or in the locality where they actually settled. And this is where it becomes very confusing. Many people did not apply for citizenship when they immediately arrived, so that they may have migrated, they might have emigrated across the country. So while they might have landed in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, New Orleans, they may not have applied for citizenship until they moved to Ohio or Iowa or Washington State. So trying to figure that part out is is one of our difficulties. The other thing that makes it more complex is what court did they apply in? They could have applied in any of the courts, city, county, state, or the federal court. And not all three sets of papers were necessarily done in the same court. So here is a simple declaration of intention that was filed in 1913, and it is for John Baptist Balza. It gives his age, his occupation, and a brief physical description of him. And he has come from Belgium, and it gives the actual date where he came from, and that he resided in Wisconsin. So he's probably applying in Wisconsin. It talks about not the individual ship, but the Red Star Line in which he immigrated on, and he's renouncing oath to Albert I, King of Belgium. So these are his first papers. The second set, after fulfilling the 3-year residence requirement, the people could come and file an actual petition. We've had the first intention. Now we're following up with the petition. And they usually presented statements of witnesses that, remember, they had to prove that they were of good moral character. So that's where witnesses and witness statements come into play. And as part of the petition, they also took the oath of allegiance, renouncing the King of Belgium or the Queen of some country. So here we see another form for Mr. Saul Weitz, and he is living in Los Angeles, California. And it states his birth, his residence, and when he came to the United States, and they also have his marriage information. And let's see. He was born in 1901. He married in 1923. It gives his wife's birth information, his children's information. So we see information about the family as well. And of course, the children were born in Los Angeles as well. We see his renouncing his citizenship to the Republic of Poland. And this is all filed. He immigrated in 1920. One of the interesting things, and where is it exactly? He has an alias. He's applying as Saul, but his birth name was actually Solomon. And I'm trying to scan and I don't see it right off the top of my, but I hope you can see it at home. Here is the affidavit from witnesses. This is a simple form, but in some cases, and we'll see some of those later, they're actual written out, handwritten statements from witnesses. And then the court follows up with accepting of the witness statements. But we see that here again, we have a witness that is attesting that they know Saul and that is he is of good character. And finally, the oath of allegiance, which he is signing in 1930. Finally, after the significant waiting period, we get the certificate of naturalization. So we have to recognize that these may be combined into a single set of papers, or that it could be 3 individual sets. We have seen 3 individual sheets from the previous examples, but we will also see where some of these records have been combined into a single form, especially in the 1800s. And as I said, these can all be filed in either a single court or in multiple different courts in perhaps different locations. Here finally is a simple certificate of citizenship. Some of them are quite elaborate, some of them are lengthy. This one happens to be simple. We are having Reinhold Schwartz, and he is being admitted to citizenship after the appropriate witness statements, the swearing of an oath of allegiance, and finally, in the 5th of September, 1906, he is being admitted to the United States as a full citizen. Here is another one, relatively simple and straightforward, for Frederick Winkler, and he is being naturalized in May of 1888. Simple and straightforward. So how do you get started in looking for this information about your immigrant ancestor? The best place, especially in later years, 1900 to 1940, is to look at your censuses. There are columns in each of these censuses that talk about citizenship, and pay particular attention to those columns. They have the year of immigration. And I know in my own family, in each one of those censuses, the year of immigration is different, but it helps you to narrow down. It's usually within a 1 to 5 year time span. You can also look to determine the status of their citizenship. Are they listed as an alien? They haven't even filed their initial papers. Or have papers been filed? Or are they fully naturalized? And we'll look at a couple of censuses. Here we see a census page from 1900 with quite a number of people. This is New York City, that are from Italy. And I have blown up the citizenship and immigration column to show that someone came in 1890 and they are an alien. 1885, they've been here for 15 years, but there's no indication as to their status. We see aliens. We see someone who has been fully naturalized. And in the case of families, once that husband was naturalized, depending on the year, the wife and children, young children, were automatically naturalized. Here is a census from Fremont County, Colorado in 1920. And we see years of immigration and their status. They're naturalized. They are aliens. And at the very bottom, we see that papers. So they have started the initial process to become citizens. It's important to note that the records prior to 1906 could have been filed in any of those courts that we mentioned earlier. After 1906, all records are federal records, and those records are housed at the National Archives where the event occurred, and we'll look at the list of national archives. Ancestry fortunately does have copies of the federal court files for naturalization, and they do have some of those that were processed by the states, but they definitely do not have all. So if you were fortunate and your people came after 1906, Ancestry is a good source for the information. Here is a simple listing of the 14 branches of the National Archives. And hopefully, as we've said, you don't need to turn to them, but to Ancestry to get your citizenship information. Here's a listing from the card catalog for Ancestry. And if you'll notice, I had just entered the term naturalization, and we see Washington state naturalizations, but we have small numbers. We see individual counties within estates. Missouri, there were no records. We see small numbers, but here again, for the most part, these are federal naturalization papers, maybe some state papers. Family Search, I found, did not have a whole bunch of information about petitions for naturalization. A lot of them are not copies of the original records. When you see the author being the District Court for New York, those are probably going to be actual papers. But for the most part, Family Search just has the index cards, not the actual papers themselves. If you do see naturalization intent, read carefully. These are copied from the records of, so this is an extraction. We see the authors as genealogical societies. So here again, these are definitely secondary sources. These are extracted records, and we always want to try and find the originals. Ancestry does have a significant number of the index cards. And as we have seen, Family Search does also. So try and see if you can find your ancestors' index card. This is one that I happen to, it is for someone in my particular family. And we note that it is the New York County Court of Common Pleas. And supposedly he was naturalized in 1866. It gives his address, and here is his witness. Do you have any idea how many Michael Cooneys there are in Ancestry with immigration cards, immigrants from Ireland? So which of the ones is mine? The feasibility date, and I'll go through some of the things that helped me determine that indeed this was my person. It says 1866. So find a census, a city directory, or some kind of county history that confirms that your ancestor lived in that particular area at that particular time. This card was filed in New York City. And Is there any relationship to the witness? By looking at those censuses, is this a neighbor that appears in a census? Is there a family connection? Is there some other business connection that might exist to help you verify that, yes, this is the person I'm looking for? I have from the National Archives the papers for Michael Cooney. He came to the United States. He arrived in New York in September of 1856. So 1866 is potentially feasible. He immediately joined the military, the cavalry, 3 months after arriving. In 1866, he was stationed in Texas. However, he's applying for citizenship in New York. But in the 1860 and 1870 censuses, he is actually serving with Patrick Cusick, who was the witness on his papers. He actually married his wife in Texas, or excuse me, in New York City. She was living in New York City, an immigrant also. So that indeed is my Michael Cooney. I pointed out that this was the New York County Court of Common Pleas. These papers were not on Ancestry. I had to write for these papers to the National Archives. And we see that he's a soldier. That's another good confirmation. And the date that matches the index card. I mentioned earlier that rather than the 3 sets of papers, individual sheets, we see them as a single set of papers. And in this particular case, they fall on a single sheet of paper. And we see his intention. We see his actual petition. And finally, the statement of the witness. And finally, his admission to citizenship. Another one from the index card is a Gabriel Sosnitsky, who's being naturalized in 1897. He's a grocer. He lives on Attorney Street. He's got a witness, Abraham Fielman, and his date of arrival and his birth date. Good family information. He does appear on a ship list from 1881 on the ship list state of Florida. So timing is good. He is listed in the New York City directories from 1886 through 1902. And during that time, he's living at 47 Attorney Street. So we've got some good confirmation. Here is, and here again, this is a U.S. District Court. So these are definitely going to be on Ancestry. And we see his initial intention being filed. And he has the second set of papers. We're doing the petition. And we see in July of 1897, different statements. Finally, we have the witness statements, the swearing of allegiance to the United States, and the admission as a citizen. Different courts had different forms, and you'll see them, the amount of paperwork varies greatly throughout the years. Here is one from the state of Michigan for a James Smith, another one that's going to present, how do you know that it is the correct James Smith? Hopefully, using the methodology that I have just shown you, you can certify that it is your James Smith. And his file date of information. And we see just a simple form. And it's not even, well, I guess it is the full page where he is being admitted. Where's the backup paper? Well, we have the handwritten statements. This is a statement of a witness that is claiming that he knows this person and that Mr. Smith, and that he is of good moral character. I've known him for a certain period of time, etc. And the court actually came back and said that they had evaluated the information and that they were accepting the testimony of the witnesses. And you might find 3 or 4 witness statements in a packet of information. The more recent ones have a great wealth of information. As we have seen in the previous ones, we have little or no genealogical information. You might get the year of immigration, and you might be lucky enough to get some birth information. But rarely do you get the wives, the children, etc. But after 1906, we do see a lot of that, and some of them even do contain photographs. Here we have a lady, Luigia Esposito, from Italy, and we get all of her birth information, a physical description of her, when she came to the United States, and exactly where she came from, and what ship she came on. And wow, a photograph. Excuse me. This was her intention. We now get her petition, where a significant amount of the same information is repeated that we saw on the previous page. Finally, we see the affidavit of witnesses and her oath of allegiance in 1944. So sometimes it takes time to do all these. And for the first time, we see one of these certificates of arrival that has been mentioned before. We have a ship list and a date. So hopefully you can find her actual immigration on that ship list. We have another certificate as far as her immigration is concerned. And some of these files have contained maybe as many as 10 or 12 sheets of paper. And in some cases, like the one that we're looking at now, we see some duplication. This is a certificate for Miss Silbowitz, and she's also known as Helen Silver. So for some reason, she has Americanized her name. In a lot of cases, there is the myth that people's names were changed at the point of immigration. And for the most part, that is not true. In many cases, people did voluntarily Americanize their names, especially when their children entered school. What's interesting about this is we have her declaration of intention with all of the same information that we've seen before, where she was born, when she came. But we see a duplicate that actually contains her photograph. And we go through her various papers. We have her petition, which repeats in many, many cases the same information. Finally, the oath from witnesses and the oath of allegiance. And we have her name change. She actually went through a legal process to change her name. Her certificate of arrival. Whoops. And if we pursue that, we find her actual immigration on the ship list. Finally, we have Charles Baltz, and we have, and I apologize, I believe that this is an application for a passport. And this is sometimes significant information as well. If your person was an immigrant, their application for a passport will also give some vital information as far as their citizenship is concerned. Here's another form from California with respect to Charles, and we have the certificate and page number, where he came from, and his actual date of naturalization. The witness statements. So different forms for different courts throughout the country. And finally, we do have in the matter of the application. So I apologize about the confusion there. That was probably his intention. We finally do have Charles Baltz for California, 1880, and he's declaring, he's abjuring his citizenship to the Emperor of Germany. Here again, it's important to recognize that in many cases, if your male immigrant did not become a U.S. citizen, they could be subject to conscription in their home country. So, briefly, always look for the originals. There are those index cards that are significant pointers to your potential immigrant ancestor and his naturalization status and papers. You may be lucky to find those records online, but you may have to contact either a regional national archives or try to determine the actual court where your person was naturalized. And alas, even if your person did become naturalized, you may not find what you're looking for. My grandfather, Terri, was an immigrant from Canada. And other than a simple listing of his name in a court paper, there are no additional papers as far as his citizenship is concerned. So you just never know. And don't forget, your person may not have become naturalized. So if you have had any questions during the course of the presentation and they haven't been addressed, if you would like to contact me, feel free to do so. And we're going to take a look at pension records next month. If you have found some of the pension records from your ancestors, have you actually read them very thoroughly? Have you gleaned all of the family history information that may be contained in them? Some of them may just be simple statements, but others may have significant information for you. So we hope to see you on Saturday, June 10th for Hidden in the Pension Records. Thank you for joining us this morning.